Recently, we helped one of our clients, who's a real estate investor, actually double her net income.
Less worry, less management, long-term lease. It was originally a 20-year lease. I think there were 18 years that were remaining on it, and they still had 4 or 5-year options on it. Hi, I'm George Pino, the CEO of Commercial Brokers International, and thanks for joining us today. Today I'm sitting here with Young Lee. He's an associate with us in the firm, and we just recently closed a deal, single-tenant net lease transaction that we thought you'd have some interest in.
Happy Friday, George. And just recently we helped one of our clients, who's a real estate investor, actually double her net income. And I wanted to see if you could just tell me and our viewers a little bit more about that.
Okay, absolutely. So, a lot of times what we do when we take in a new investor is, the biggest thing I think a lot of agents forget to do is actually interview the client and find out what their goals are, because you want to match the goals with the investment. Right. And this lady that came to us, they reached out to us saying they had an investment property in Los Angeles, and it was actually a residential investment property, single family residence in one of the better neighborhoods of Los Angeles as far as the demographics go. It was in North Santa Monica, and the real estate agent called me and said, I have a client that has this property that's an investment property, and they're netting just under $8,000 a month for it, renting out for about $11,500, $12,000 a month, but then with after property tax and everything else, they're netting about $7,900 a month or so, give or take. And he was asking, well, she's looking to sell, but what can we do? She doesn't want to sell unless she can replace it with something that would get a better return. So we started looking at it and and originally they were just looking to really increase their income by close to 20% or so. And I thought we could actually do better for them, especially when we start doing the next step of the interview with new clients is actually gauging their risk assessment. Right. Understanding what kind of risk they're willing to take, because like any investment, it's risk versus reward.
Sure.
So, those were the initial steps that we took with that client. When it came to onboarding, intake, and really understanding what they're trying to accomplish.
Right. Yeah. $8,000. That's pretty good income, wouldn't you say?
It's not bad at all. But like what I say with every client that has an investment property, why'd you buy that property? Right. It's an investment, right? Mm-hmm. So you should be looking at your investment. If you put money in the stock market, you're not going to forget about it for 10, 15 years. But a lot of people do that when it comes to real estate. They have the investment and they just keep going and it keeps coming in. But what they should be doing on an annual basis with all their investments, whether it's real estate, stocks, whatever it may be, you want to take a look at it and see if there's an alternative investment that may be able to get you a better return. So, and or accomplish the goals that you're trying to accomplish even more so,
Absolutely, yeah.
So, part of what we talked about with onboarding this lady, now she had inherited this property, and yes, $8,000 net for a single family residence sounds like it's a good investment. When I was talking to her residential agent, he was expecting to sell it in the 3.5 million range. So when we started looking at that, we're like, well, I know that even after cost of sale and everything else, if we were to do a 1031 exchange, we should be able to increase her net operating income by at least 70-80%, maybe more. And so that was part of the whole analysis when we started talking with her and explaining, here's what we have, here's what we're looking at, and here's what you're trying to accomplish. In addition to that, that's before any kind of tax benefits if we were to increase the basis as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. Every investor, whether you said stocks, property, everybody should be looking to maximize their return in every way. Yeah. And so just kind of wanted to see if you could give us a little bit more insight on how you approach that with a higher return in this transaction.
So, absolutely. So, when we were speaking with her, we were trying to gauge how much how much time she spent on her investment. Was she hands off? Was she hands on? What was she doing with that? And what was she looking to accomplish?
Right.
What we came to find out is that she was semi-retired. She was actually using a lot of that income that was being generated for medical expenses. And because of that, she was spending almost all of the net income that she was getting and all of her income just for the medical expenses and living expenses. So she really didn't have much for entertainment purposes or even for a nest egg or anything else. In fact, her property was going into tax default, the investment property she had. Even though she was netting $8,000 a month, she was still spending more than what she was netting. So we were speaking with her and saying, well, it sounds to me that you want something that's a little bit more hands-off so you can deal with your own personal issues as well, the medical issues that she was dealing with a family member, not herself, but another family member, but also that you wanted to increase the income so you can actually do a little bit more perhaps and put aside some savings, things like that. So we started talking to her about location. One of the best ways to increase income can be geography. And so we started looking at different areas and different types of products that we would be interested in. We came to a very quick conclusion that she wanted something that had a long-term lease in place so that she wouldn't have to worry about it in 3, 4,
Right.
5 years. She also wanted something with a very strong guarantor and also with some increases built in and a bump up on her income. We felt we could really do that, so we started concentrating our searches and to make sure that we were mitigating any kind of impact from going out of state since she was still living and didn't want to pay California state taxes. We were looking at income tax-free states.
Right.
So, you have 9 income tax-free states throughout the U.S. that you can buy property on and not have to pay income tax in that state for those.
Okay. Yeah, and then one thing I wanted to kind of dive into was kind of the risk. Mentioned earlier, high risk, high reward. Now, just kind of wanted to see, were you looking at such high risk investments?
Not really. Because and the reason why I say that is, all investments carry some sort of intrinsic risk. All investments do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be investments. They'd be,
Right.
hey, I got a great, a great golden goose. But so the investment has to have some sort of risk that's in there. So what we did was we were trying to, on asking questions to the client to gauge or do a risk assessment of how much risk she's willing to take on. We also were talking about, well, are you looking at more for cash flow versus appreciation? Or do you want a mix of appreciation and cash flow? Things like that. So when we start looking at it, we realize that the best opportunity for her to accomplish her goals was a single tenant net lease investment property that was out of state. So from there, we started looking at different brands, different companies. The way I like to mitigate risk is, it's obviously the guarantor, the strength of the guarantor. But also, number one rule in real estate, they say, is location, location, location.
Always.
So because of that, we concentrated on locations. Even if it was even a tertiary market, we still wanted a very strong location, meaning I'm looking for good demographics that are growing. I'm looking for good traffic counts. I'm looking for locations that are either not too many of them are, such as hard corners. There's, every retailer wants to be in a hard corner, a signalized intersection, versus mid-block versus, a soft corner where there's no stoplight. So we're looking at the prime locations even in tertiary markets. So this way it mitigates the risk of even if that tenant goes out. But then we now have a lot of AI tools that are available to us. So one of which allowed us to actually take a look at where, if you're looking at a system-wide chain, there are some AI tools that are out there that will tell you where that chain or where that one location falls within the chain as far as number of visits and sales that you can extrapolate from that. So we were looking for locations that had that were in the top 70 percentile. Very low likelihood of closing them.
Right.
Because usually you're going to close your worst performing stores of anything else. So with that in mind, we started looking at different types of properties throughout the U.S. and trying to find them.
Okay. So one thing you mentioned was single tenant net lease. For our viewers who might not know exactly, just Could you kind of go into that and
Absolutely.
and talk about like what kind of properties our client was potentially looking to acquire?
Absolutely. So a single tenant is kind of self-explanatory as far as there's one tenant.
Right.
Now a net lease. Now typically what we're doing with is we're dealing with investment grade type properties or tenants. So a net lease means that the tenant is responsible for all of the payments, meaning not just the rent, but they're also paying for all the maintenance. They're also paying for all the repairs.
Okay.
They're also paying for all the property taxes, all the insurance.
Right.
So the landlord actually has absolutely no expenses or very little. Sometimes there may be a carve out, like certain types of brands, such as Starbucks. A lot of times they have what they call a double net plus lease, in where the tenant is responsible for everything, but the landlord may be responsible for one or two items like the roof replacement or parking lot restriping or replacement or repairs.
Right.
So, it's very limited, very hands off for the landlord, which allows them to go outside the geography. Also, when we're looking at it and looking at who typically makes up single tenant net lease, there are some single tenant net lease industrial properties. There are even some single tenant net lease office properties. Very few, but there are some. But the majority of single tenant net lease are retail. So you have retailers who have clients that are coming into the stores. So these are everything from fast food to which are QSRs, quick service restaurants, fast food restaurants. It might be a convenience store. It could be gas stations. It could be banks. It could be a big box retailers such as grocery stores, Home Depots, Lowe's, REI, things along those lines. So those tenants, even though they're huge and large, their core business is not real estate. So they typically lease their properties out, and they lease them, and they typically lease them for long terms. Usually, single tenant net lease is anywhere from, on the low end, 10 years on the initial term with maybe 3 to 4 5-year options, up to 20 25 years on the initial term with another 3 or 4 options depending. So the leases can go anywhere from, with the options typically, anywhere from 20 years all the way up to 40 plus years, and in some cases I've seen them go as far as 75 years.
Wow.
So some of the drugstores,
Okay. Gotcha.
some of the old Walgreens leases,
CVS's.
CVS's, things like that. So with that in mind, the nice part is it now opens the geography. You don't have to necessarily have boots on the ground. You have a tenant that is co-aligned with you to maintain the maintenance of that property, because every tenant realizes that when your retail store or your restaurant is dirty or broken, then you lose clients.
Right.
So they're very much co-aligned with the landlord to maintain the look of the property and as nice as possible to make sure that they get as many clients and their sales continue. So that's the beautiful part about the single tenant net lease. You're only dealing with one tenant. It is typically a long-term lease in place, and a lot of times it can be a credit tenant or a tenant that has a lot higher net worth.
I was going to say credit rating
Then
corporations.
either credit rated, either corporations or even franchisees. I mean, recently, one of the largest franchisees in the Burger King system sold back to Burger King.
Right.
This had over 1,100 locations.
Jeez.
And so, but to put that in perspective, that's larger than some actual chains by multiples.
Yeah.
I mean, Raising Cane's, everyone's talking about, has right now about 500 locations, maybe 600 locations.
So more than double.
This franchisee was about double, if not more than double.
Yeah.
In-N-Out, they have about 400 locations right now. This
On the West
franchisee would
Coast.
be almost 3 times the size of In-N-Out. A franchisee.
Yeah.
So this is what we're looking at. Who are the guarantees? Just because it's a franchisee doesn't mean it's a bad guarantor or a weak guarantee on it. It's just how it's structured and what we're looking for, and that's what we're doing. And in fact, we were able to find a great property for this lady that fit all of her goals within the time frame for the 1031.
And one of the things I did want to point out was you said the timeline, especially for 1031s. Now, for potential new investors, can you go a little bit more into detail about the timeline and
Sure.
how long it would take to acquire such a property?
Absolutely. Now, let's touch base quickly on the 1031 timelines.
Okay.
Initially, and mainly because those are the ones that you have to hit.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so 1031 timelines from the day you sell your property, which is called a down leg, you have 45 days to identify what your up leg property is, potentially up to 3 properties in that 45-day period. From there, you now have 180 days total from the closing date to close escrow. Okay, so a lot of people get concerned because what if I can't find that property by the 45th day?
Yeah.
Do I have to settle for something that's junky? Do I have to not, and typically speaking, no, there are options out there, but the beautiful part about the single tenant net lease market is that it is considered as one of the most liquid markets in real estate, and there's always some sort of transactions going on and trading around there, and there's always investors that are out there and sellers that are out there willing to sell, depending on even in some of the worst economies. So with that in mind, we're looking at the property itself that she was looking to acquire and the strength of the guarantor and making sure that the strength is matched so that she wouldn't have to worry about it, but then also mitigating that with store sales, where it falls within the system, and things like that. So we were actually able to locate a great property that was in Texas. It was a franchisee. It was actually the largest franchisee of the Sonic chain, which Sonic is a chain of drive-ins, burgers, or the oldest chain of drive-ins out there. And but what was interesting about this property is that it was in the 87th percentile of all Sonics nationwide. In addition to that, the property was almost 100, and it was about 160, a little bit over 160% of the store sales were 160% of the AUVs of the average AUVs across the system. So they were 60% higher than the average Sonic burger. This is a location that is very unlikely to close, or if it were to close, it's going to be one of the very last Sonics to close.
Sure.
And so taking a look at that now, the only thing that we're worried about next is, well, maybe this is a franchisee that just got lucky and it only has 1 or 2 locations. But as I mentioned before, this is actually was operated and guaranteed by the largest Sonic franchisee, which had over 185 locations, I believe, at the time. Mm-hmm. Probably an estimated net or estimated market cap rate of probably somewhere between $200 and $250 million as the guarantee on the lease, versus the guarantee that they had, a personal guarantee on the home, which bears a lot of risk as well.
True.
In addition to that, the nice part about the commercial versus the residential side, we've been talking about risk assessment and stuff. Mm-hmm. I used to invest in residential income properties all the time, and I've made that transition now into retail properties, single tenant net lease, things like that. But one of the things I really didn't care for when it came to residential income is so much government oversight. Whether it's a house, whether it's an apartment, whether it's a duplex, whatever it might be, because people are living there, there's a lot of government oversight, and especially in certain states. And that made it very difficult to either operate, or it caused us to hire more people. We had, it was just crazy. By selling those properties, exchanging them into single tenant net lease type assets or other retail assets, the wonderful part is we've increased our income, but also our workload has dropped dramatically, our property management, because really we don't have to do anything. We're not calling someone to fix anything or anything along those lines. It's pretty simple, straightforward. We just go out and make sure that we have the insurance certificates every year, make sure we get the rent, and make sure that they're maintaining the property like they're supposed to. So every few months we go out and check on the properties.
That's interesting. So she went from a single-family residence where she had monthly, yearly payments just going out of her pocket, transitioning to, you said, a Sonic drive-in all the way in Texas, which happens to be an income tax-free state, and minimizing her responsibilities to nearly zero. But then she resides in California.
Yeah, in
so
California.
How does that work?
Well, if you're in California, you can still purchase anywhere. You're still going to have to pay the state income tax with the state that you're located in.
Right.
But the idea is that you don't want to buy in another state that you have to pay double income tax, meaning
Right.
pay that state's income tax and your state's income tax. So until she moves out to another area or another state that's maybe income tax free, she'll still have to pay the income tax in the state where she lives in. But we were able to really mitigate a lot of that as well, just from the structure, not the income taxes, not mitigate that, but the expense wise. We talked about how we were able to increase her income. The actual number, we went from about $7,900 a month of her net income to over 15,500. It was almost about 15,600, almost double.
Yeah.
And this is, and when I say her net income of roughly 7,900 a month or so, remember she wasn't able to pay her property taxes with that.
Mm-hmm.
So in this scenario, at the 15.5, or it was 15.5 and a little bit and change above that, the tenant's still paying the property taxes.
Yeah.
They're paying all that. So that's an actual true net figure to her. So she was literally able to double her income, less worry, less management, long-term lease. It was originally a 20-year lease. I think there were 18 years that were remaining on it. And they still had 4 or 5 year options on it.
Okay. I mean, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a winner to me.
It is definitely a winner, and it's something that we surprisingly do quite often. This was probably a little bit more of a win than we can usually achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, though, we're still seeing about a 50 to 70% increase in income when we're transitioning from a single family residence into a single tenant net lease type opportunity, especially if you're coming from California, where the rental rates are not necessarily correspondent to the value of the home itself.
Okay. And then one last question, I guess, you kind of touched on this earlier, but just for new potential investors, how do you go about looking for such high return properties?
The best way, and I know this sounds a little self-fulfilling, but the best way is to actually have brokers. I mean, what I do myself, myself and my team, and you, we have a network of brokers that around the country that list single tenant net lease properties. We've been doing this long enough so that they know who we are. We get first looks at a lot of properties, whether they're coming from a developer that's developing a single tenant net lease property and they haven't taken it to market yet, or a broker who's working on the materials and we have a 1 or 2 week head start on everybody else by taking a look at it,
Right.
or it's just scouring
Yeah.
everybody's websites and conversations and reaching out to them and looking at all that. That's something that we've been doing for a decade. Continue to build those relationships. We are consistently getting off-market deals put in front of us. The funny part is now I think I can honestly say I've made friendships with people I've never actually met around the country from a lot of these brokers. But it's really finding the brokers. I mean, because the ultimate thing is, if you're looking for a single tenant net lease property, there's essentially 6 companies that control all the majority of the listings.
Okay.
And if you go to any one of those companies because they specialize in single tenant net lease, well, they specialize on the listing side. The problem is they're only going to show you their listings first, what they have and what's out there. They're not going to necessarily walk you through how to analyze and what the issues are.
Right.
We don't specialize. I don't specialize in listings. I love finding the right property for the buyer to fit their investment criteria, needs, and goals. I love doing that. I think it's like a puzzle piece. It's part of the fun of the job, and that's one of the things that we do. So that's what I would recommend. It can, can you do it on your own? Absolutely. It would. I would argue that you and I can look at a property, I would argue, and within 3 to 5 minutes, if that even sometimes, determine whether or not it's something to even pursue further, look into it more.
Yeah.
And that is just from experience, from seeing literally hundreds of properties every single day.
Yeah.
So we have a really good indication of the market. For someone to learn the market and find the properties and go about finding it themselves, this is a 6-month, 1 year at least of studying. Instead, I would just, find a good broker. Doesn't have to be me. Doesn't have to be you. although you may like that, but there are other good brokers out there that specialize in helping you find single tenant net lease assets. So that's definitely the route I would go as far as locating and finding them. And then, make sure you have an agent that you're working with that has good transparency, that shows you, talks about it, shows not just the positives, but also the negatives.
Right.
You know,
Right.
my first thing I always look at is whether it's a great location, whether, even if it's a brand new property that has a brand new 20-year lease. First thing I think of is, who am I going to re-tenant this with in 2-3 years if they go out of business?
Right.
And I want to make sure I can do that. So, that's my risk versus reward kind of analysis as well.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Hopefully one day I'll also be able to own a single tenant at least myself as well. But looking forward to the process.
Well,
And
I'm sure you'll own one soon, sooner than you may think even. But I definitely by the end of the year. And for anyone that's looking or has any questions regarding single tenant net lease assets, please do reach out to either myself or to Young. Our contact information is below. We'd love to help you out, answer any questions. A lot of what we do is education based to just help people understand the market and learn it. And we work with them for as long as need be until they're ready to make that decision to purchase. Thanks for joining in, and look forward to seeing you guys again and hearing from you.